What's going on, everyone? Matt McCarthy here on a Wednesday evening, bringing you some GR Weekly Week 11 preview. And as the first time or you're a recurring sort of guest, thank you for joining us. And while you're here, make sure to like and subscribe to the Gridiron Ratings YouTube channel. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at Methodical1. And on Gridiron Rating, make sure to follow us at Gridiron Rating over on Twitter. We got bunch of games to preview today. Not a lot of time. Trying to keep these under a half hour. It's my real goal for these. So we just got to kick it off real quick with the Week 11 buys, which would be the Denver Broncos, the LA Rams. They will not appear on this broadcast. But who will appear? Let's kick it off with our Thursday night football game. New England Patriots versus the Atlanta Falcons. New England favored by 47.5 point over-under. Starting over on the Atlanta side, we can start and stop this team really with Cordell Patterson because we have to talk about him, which is really weird. We're putting so much, again, respect onto Patterson's name and, year, whatever it is for him, 8, 9 or so. But versus defense on a short week, I don't really love the start from him, even if he does play. We have to really monitor if he is going to be active tomorrow for this Thursday night football contest. As of right now, he is practicing with the bum ankle, and I'm not particularly fond of this team with or without him, especially without him. But without Ridley, who's been stepped away from football for personal reasons, in the 2 of the last 3 games that the Atlanta Falcons played without Ridley, this team has stunk. They have failed to score 14 points in 2 of those games, failed to go over 215 total yards of offense in 2 of those 3 games. If Patterson misses his game, it's a downgrade across the board, but I think a downgrade in particular for Kyle Pitts. In terms of hierarchy of, skills players on this team, Pitts is definitely above the fold, whoever else be going, if no Cordell Patterson is active for the Falcons. And be no reason for New Orleans just say, beat us with anyone else. We're just going to focus on Kyle Pitts and make any other player in Atlanta really be someone who can contribute for them. Because through the grouping of Mike Davis, Wayne Gallman, Tajay Sharp, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Russell Gage, that is not a particularly good-looking group. For me, I'm avoiding pretty much any option that is not Kyle Pitts or Cordell Patterson if he is active. Otherwise, with Pitts, right now, he is no longer is a locked-in top 5 sort of guy for me, or top 6 as it may be. He's my favorite of the group of him, Waller, and Hawkins, who are moving down my tight end rankings, which you can find at my pinned link on my Twitter at Methodical1 for sure. But in terms of, usage for these players, we saw Wayne Gallman getting a good amount of work last week against Dallas. That was because they were down by 30 points, which can happen in this matchup just as easily. But for me, don't go out and rush Wayne Gallman because of the usage in an odd situation. I still think Mike Davis is going to be the lead back there, and he's been losing out on receiving work because of Cordell Patterson's emergence. Otherwise, in terms of the rest of the players, receivers, I'm not really looking to any of them as being good options in this one. Matt Ryan scored 2 points last week. He can score 2 points just as well in this one. I'm avoiding most of these Falcons. Over on the New England side, Mac Jones entering the fantasy conversation for, I think, the first time this season in 1 quarterback leagues. Still not starting him, but if he keeps on focusing on my boy Hunter Henry, who was supposed to be my boy Johnny Smith, but not still super tilted that I put my attached my wagon to the wrong player over there in the tight end spot in New England, but it is what it is. But Hunter Henry scores in all but 1 week since week 4. Speaking of options, for Hunter Henry and the tight end spot, I'm ranking him over Pitts this week. I'm ranking him just behind Kelsey, Kittle, and Andrews. Those are that's what I think is the big 3. It was a big 6, or Kelsey plus the other 5. But now I think Kelsey, Kittle, and Andrews are the real firm group of tight ends where I think you're getting a real advantage. Past those guys, you can really bring in any other sort of player. For guys like right now, I think Hunter Henry is looking like that. But in terms of the rest of the group, it's really going to be just kind of a toss. And we do have a question in the chat. I'm assuming this is David Montgomery, be a safe start this week? I think he's a fine RB2 spot. I don't like that Baltimore game that much. You're really just starting kind of the general guys. But in terms of who I'm ranking him against or who's ahead of Dave Montgomery, if that is Dave Montgomery. So like guys like Myles Gaskin, I think in a plus matchup against the New York Jets. Josh Jacobs, I have him right ahead of him. I have him if whichever Kansas City back does start. I think Montgomery is a good slot in there. I do think if we don't have Clyde this week, maybe I'll actually rank Darrell Williams ahead of. But think of him as a low RB2 option. Guys like Barkley, Gibson, Mark Ingram, if it's just him, but it looks like it's not going to be just him. Those are the kind of guys I'm ranking ahead of Dave Montgomery. But for me, I think he's a fine, not great option at your running back too. But thank you for the question. Sticking with this New England Patriots situation, we like tight ends that score. and no one's scoring more touchdowns right now than Hunter Henry at tight end, there's a shot for him to disappoint, just like any other player any given week. But guys like, with options like Waller and Hawkinson not being sure things, I'm right now in on Henry, I think in a plus spot against New England under the dome. I think this is going to be a very good spot for him. It's a very good spot for whichever running back is going to be the lead out of the gate for New England Patriots. It looks like Damian Harris is indeed going to be active this game. He's dealing with the concussion symptoms. If Harris is the lead back and he's going to get a normal lead amount of work for New England, I do like Harris quite a bit. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Ramondre Stevenson has earned himself a good amount of work. Him and Stevenson, I think, are both going to be fine options. I'm not particularly loving them as, locked in sort of starts, but I think they're going to be enough of a sort of workload in this sort of game for them to both have good days, maybe not great days, unless they really decide to go with one guy. Second question in the chat. Saquon, A.J. Dillon, or James Conner? I like A.J. Dillon the most of that group. In terms of how I'm ranking them currently, it would be Dillon at 11, James Conner right behind him at 12, Saquon 16. I don't like that matchup against Tampa Bay. So in terms of how it goes right now, the matchup against Seattle and the matchup against Minnesota, I think are going to be Minnesota are going to be much better options, I think, in this one than it would be for Saquon Barkley. First game back in a spot where Tampa Bay is really just shutting down opposing backfields. They're averaging 50-something yards as a backfield against them. I will be looking to go with Dillon, who I think is a downhill runner. He may see between 2 and 4 receptions in the game as well. That would really boost him up if it is a PPR format for you. And James Conner, I think you're going to have back Kyler Murray. I think you're going to have back DeAndre Hopkins in Seattle. I really like that spot for Arizona. Those are going to be my options there. I have them both as top 12 options this week in week 11. But thank you for your question. In terms of the rest of the New England Patriots, Jacoby Myers is a fine option. I think he's a flex. It was very nice for him to score, but I'm not getting really too ahead of myself. Hunter Henry is my favorite play from the New England side relative to position. And then Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, they're going to be both fine plays for New England. And the defense, you're going to want to start that New England defense for sure. Miami versus the Jets. Miami -3, 44.5 point over under. Tough to bet. I do not love these offenses that much, but I do love the spot for Miami. I've loved spots from before, and they've disappointed. But we have to talk about real quick about Myles Gaskin. I think he's a good RB2, but his game log is just crazy. You have to look it up. He has not had back-to-back double-digit performances once this season. He'll have like a 10-point game and then like a 2-point game, 30-point game, and then a 0.5 game. But he has not failed you in back-to-back weeks. He's always going to get you to about 10 points. Last week was a bad Myles Gaskin week. So by all intents and purposes, this is a week where Myles Gaskin you can start and be comfortable with. Not only the matchup and not only whatever weird off-on switch is being flipped for him. I do think there's a spot where you can finally have some comfortability having Gaskin in your starting lineup. I do like him here. I like a good amount of these Miami Dolphins. I'm actually a little surprised they're only favored by 3 right now. I think this line is going to move from where I got it. But Waddle and Gasicki are fine. I don't expect another goose egg for Mike Gesicki. And Waddle, I think the problem with this perception with him being more than what he is. He's a very good wide receiver 3. But that's what he is. He's a wide receiver 3. He's right outside my wide receiver 2. I think he's the last guy in. I think he's wide receiver 25 for me. But I think I like him there. I don't like putting him up there with the top 24. I don't think he's really earned that spot. He's having a tough time getting over 65 yards in, a good amount of his games this year. Do have another question in the chat. But thank you for the questions. Saquon or Marquise Brown at flex? That's a tough one. It's going to come down to, I think, an issue of how much are they going to use Saquon against Tampa Bay? If they're going to pass to him, and it was not something they were doing a lot of early in the season. What you used to see out of Barkley were little dump-off passes in years prior, especially when Eli was still hanging around. You're not seeing a lot of that this year early in the season. He wasn't getting a good amount of receiving work, which was a problem for him to just kind of get cheap points. I don't love that Chicago game. I think if you're looking for a floor play, I think you go with Brown. But if you're looking for a ceiling play, you go with Saquon. Now look at your roster and determine, do you need 8 to 12 points? Or are you going to need, 14 to 18 points? Because Barkley, I think, can hit 14, 18 a little bit easier if he's going to be involved on both fronts. But Brown, and I don't think the game last week of him having, because you're seeing the amount of targets he's getting there. Just there's been some weird disconnect with him. I think it's also the possibility of Rashad Bateman being more involved can come down and hurt on Brown. But I do think Brown is a better spot to get you enough points where you're just comfortable where you at with him. But that's gonna be I think, a roster decision in terms of what your matchup opponent is going to be for the week. So Brown, floor, Saquon, ceiling is going to be my answer. And that's really just when you decide looking at the rest of your roster. But thank you for the question for sure. For the rest of the Dolphins, I think that's going to, Tua is going to be weird because I really want to make sure that he is starting. I know some people are actually, locked into Tua being the starter right now. So right now I'm not, firmly locking him in as like a top 12 option. If he was starting and there's no sort of issues medically with him, I still think I prefer Jimmy Garoppolo at 12 against that Jacksonville in that Jacksonville game. Herbert, Burrow, Wilson, these are the guys at the bottom of my top 12. I don't think Tua gets in ahead of those guys, but I would start him over Carr. Cousins in a very bad Green Bay matchup. Tannehill, who has not been very explosive, in Cam. So he's going to be around 13, and that's going to be a decision if you want to start him over Garoppolo, Herbert, Burrow. But Tua, I think, is going to be right outside the top 12 for me here in Week 11. I do think he's in a good spot, but I'm a little worried about him. For the Jets, Joe Flacco is going to be starting, and man, that gives me zero confidence in anyone on this team, which means they're going to have a 450 total yard game, of course. You're going to start Michael Carter in spots where you have him. It's very hard to go away from a running back. It's going to get a possibility of 20 touches in a game, like we've seen out of Carter. In terms of receivers, Crowder is my favorite of the bunch. I dug to see if there's any correlation with Flacco under center. The only saw it played 5 games together in 2020, through the first half of the season. At one point, one was hurt or the other was hurt. They weren't seeing a good amount of snaps together. So there wasn't really like any sort of real leverage, I thought, to say, okay, he's going to be a better play with Flacco. This is a bad team. I don't really like recommending any of the receivers. We saw like Elijah Moore score a touchdown one of the last sort of drives of the game last week against Buffalo. If you want to hang your hat on real garbage time scores, looks like Moore's getting a few of those, but I don't really like to put too much effort into that because that's how you give out bad information. I like to stick with more comfortable stuff. Crowder is my more comfortable receiver of this group in New York. Indianapolis versus Buffalo. Buffalo minus 750 point over under. I think this is a very interesting game, I think, from an NFL standpoint. But big test for the Colts main duo for sure. Because it's without a doubt the worst matchup you can have in the league from a offensive standpoint. Because Buffalo, best defense in points and yards allowed, top pass defense, top 5 run defense. Hard to say that you're not starting Jonathan Taylor. He's really pushing himself, I think, to be the 1.01 next season. He's averaging currently 25.6 full PPR points per week since week 4. That's quarterback numbers. That's fantasy MVP numbers. He is really showcasing that he is the new top dog. We lost Derrick Henry. He's now the number 1 running back in the league. And the Bills, on the other hand, are averaging around 17.3 points to opposing backfields. And again, that's not to one player. That's to your lead running back, your second running back. Maybe some other guy gets in for a few plays. That's just the whole position from an opposing side. Going to be a real tough spot to get away from Taylor, which means you're not going to get away from Taylor. Michael Pittman, on the other hand, there is a chance you have 2 receivers better than him. He's coming around wide receiver 17 at the moment. Some people do have him in their top 12. I think that's where there's possibility to be a little bit disappointed. I'm right around the expert rankers over on fantasypros.com, which again I am a part of. But there's a shot you do have 2 guys better than him on your roster. Some receivers I'm currently ranking over Pittman. Guys like, both Tampa Bay receivers, Amari Cooper, Marquise Brown, we talked about, before with the question with Saquon. These are the kind of guys I'm looking at. Again, I don't love that Chicago matchup for Brown. I think it's fine or neutral, but I really dislike this matchup against Buffalo. This is a very, very tough defense in just kind of all facets. Not a team I like really screwing around with from an offensive side, standpoint. Otherwise, no other great options from Indianapolis, unless they really want to go back to using Naheem Hines after they just pretty much went away from it entirely last week. If he's going to play just a handful of snaps, there's not really enough of a cushion to kind of get enough work for him to be really worth starting. 18 snaps last week after 28 the week prior. There just isn't much really to see otherwise from the Indianapolis Colts. Over on the Buffalo side, the only loves on this team for sure are Allen and Diggs. We saw them get a real big connection type game last week for 162 yards. I would love to have more of that. I went on friend of the show, Front Yard Fantasy, went on their show. A lot of people had questions about Stephon Diggs, about what his rest of season sort of outlook is. Games like this could be another stepping point to being very comfortable in Diggs if he has back-to-back very good performances. The other advantage Diggs has is that he does not need to play the Buffalo Bills defense. So that's always very something to really, put on that little cherry on top for this cake for Diggs. But the rest is really hard to nail down. Knox returns, plays heavy snaps, sees little work. I think he had most of it on the team in terms of pass catcher for snaps played. But I think this is a spot for him to bounce back. He's going to be my top 10. I do like him. Start him at tight end. The rest of the receivers, Sanders and Beasley, are back-to-back in my ranks because they're just as likely that one outscores the other. 3 games this season that were able to produce double-digit points at the same time. Otherwise, it's a 3-3 split. So of the 6 other games that they have played, 3 times Beasley was preferred option, 3 times Emmanuel Sanders was preferred option. In terms of like overall ceiling, the times where Beasley was the one who boomed, he boomed a little bit higher, if that's anything to really put your hat on. So I do have him 1 spot ahead. But really pick your favorite 2. They're both flex options for me. And unlike the running backs, I think the best rusher is going to be Josh Allen. I don't really ever really like either of the guys. I prefer Moss, especially not saying much. For most of these other players outside of Diggs, you're just hoping that yours the guy who scores or yours the guy that comes down with the better fantasy day. Otherwise, Allen, Diggs, and Knox are going to be my real preferred starts from this team. 13 minutes left before we get to that self-imposed half hour I wanted to get in. Baltimore versus Chicago. Baltimore favored by 4.5, 45-point over-under. Bad feeling spot for both teams. You're really going to start to require guys, and I think be fine with them. Jackson, Brown, Andrews from the Baltimore side. I've been a real big supporter of Rashad Bateman. I think this pass attack is really what they're trying to focus on now, because I really never like starting the running backs ever. They did make it a little bit cleaner. They just released Le'Veon Bell, but he wasn't really factoring a lot into this offense no matter what anyway. But Bateman, prefer the 2 Bills receivers to Rashad Bateman. I will at least say I'm no longer the highest on him because my rank of 32 would be, I thought was going to be pretty high considering ECR, and it's just around average in terms of the other rankers for this week. In Chicago, I'm really only going with David Montgomery on this one. There's no other starts for me. There is a little bit of optimism. As the Monday night football game prior to the bye was the first game Chicago had over 375 total yards of offense. A lot of that came in the fourth quarter. If you can have Fields and this offense just be more explosive, more productive, if Matt Nagy gets out of his own way, maybe we can have because having Montgomery back, I think is very big. It opens up different avenues of offensive scoring for them. But I'm still not very comfortable in Chicago in this matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. Detroit versus Cleveland. Okay, so here's a weird thing. When I was initially looking for the lines for this game, there was not on the site I usually go to. The reason is that there's a possibility that Goff does not play this game with, I believe, an oblique injury. I have it currently right now as Cleveland minus 9.5 and a 44.5 point over under. If Goff doesn't play, and Goff's not very good, but whatever else they have is worse. If he doesn't go, this hurts Hawkinson and Swift are going to be the only starts from this team no matter what. But there is let's talk about. Let's talk about if Goff does play, right? So we got to about Hawkinson. Not very consistent in terms of production. Weekly finishes between 20 and 34 from weeks 3 to 5, followed by a stretch of all top 12 in the next 3 weeks, right? And then you have him last week finish as tight end 64 because he has no points, right? He's not my top 5. I still prefer him to like waiver wire darling like Dan Arnold, but I'm worried how it goes off without Goff in terms of the overall working of it. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Swift ranking shouldn't be really too much affected against a bad on paper matchup. Even though New England was torched, even though New England torched the Cleveland run defense last week, his receiving workload is really going to be his big selling point, not necessarily his rushing, even though last week 36 touches, one of the highest touch workloads we've seen all season. There's a reason for me to keep in my top 12. I think you're going to be just as happy starting Swift as you normally are, even if there is a quarterback change. In terms of the Cleveland side, if Nick Chubb does miss this game, which there is a possibility of doing so, it's Justin Ernest Johnson. I understand it's Detroit, but I guess Jarvis Landry, there's some inkling that it's going to be the squeaky wheel week. I never love that. I love the running attack in this game against the Detroit Lions, and Landry is a flex for me at best. I'm not really messing around with the tight ends. I love the rush attack. Whichever running back is starting, you're going to love. If it's Ernest Johnson, if it's Nick Chubb, if it's both, I still think that's fine. You're going to have Ernest Johnson do a pseudo Kareem Hunt role. But that's what I think the best sort of a way for Cleveland to play their game out is just by leaning on their rush attack. And I think that right now, I think Landry is a fine start. I don't love him. And I'm going at the possibility that there's a chance that I'm going to be wrong on that. But right now, I'm not getting way too overly crazy on Jarvis Landry. Houston versus Tennessee. Tennessee minus 10, 44.5 point over under. Houston remains Brandon Cooks. That's the only player from this team I want to start pretty much ever. Tyrod Taylor really went down when he came back versus Miami. Hoping that the bye helped this team be less garbage rest of the season. But there was some hope from what Taylor was doing early in the year compared to anything else they've gotten out of this team. But I'm not starting anyone else. The running backs are still just a mess. Over on Tennessee, I understand why all the running backs were picked up off waivers and they're being asked whether to start them in spots on Twitter and other places. There's a chance to really be let down by these running backs. Unless one of them goes to a spot where they're getting goal line work or they're really focusing on them, whether it's Deontay Foreman, McNichols, or Peterson. Foreman is my favorite of the group, and that is very not comfortable saying because a few weeks ago was Peterson and McNichols going to be splitting work. Now there's a third guy, and Foreman was not supposed to look this good. And he's a big guy, and he, if he can shed tacklers, that's great. Houston's a bad run defense. It's I love AJ Brown. We love AJ Brown, but the rest of his team is just so not good at all. Just at all, period. Love Brown. I don't like the running backs. I don't want to start them. If you're going to start any of them, it's Foreman, and then I'm not comfortable. 2 games left. Let's run quickly to New Orleans versus Philadelphia. Philadelphia minus 1.5, 43 point over under. This game's really simple. It's the running backs. We need to keep an eye on these backfields because Miles Sanders is due to return from IR. Miles Sanders is supposed to be the starting running back by the head coach, Nick Sirianni. If he's back, love Sanders. Actually, I don't love Sanders, but you lose the starting options from Howard or Scott. Kenneth Gainwell is not involved in this offense basically at all. But Sanders, if he does get involved, if they really just focus on him and give him the work and throw the dang ball to him, Miles Sanders goes back to being an RB2 and in better spots. We just saw New Orleans really crush a team that has a split backfield in Tennessee. We were just talking about last week. So if it is Howard and Scott, I do not like them. I would prefer Sanders if he's the lone guy. Hurts is fine because of his rushing. Goddard dealing the concussion symptoms, going to be outside my top 12. And Smith is a wide receiver 3 for me. I understand he's coming off the 2 touchdown game. Denver and the New Orleans Saints are not the same defense. I very much respect the Saints defense. I don't like the spot for a lot of the Eagles. The other side of the ball, it's really simple for me. It's if Kamara is supposed to be, he's practicing. If he is back, I love Kamara. I like Ingram. If there's no Kamara, you love Ingram. Marquise Callaway, my favorite of the other options from the receivers. Simeon's been good, but doesn't mean you're starting him in fantasy. I still would like to see Taysom Hill be the starter for this team from a fantasy standpoint, but I do not think we're going to be getting that in 2021. Now, Green Bay versus Minnesota. Before we close this one out, we're almost to that half hour mark. We got 5 minutes to wrap this up. But Green Bay versus Minnesota. Green Bay -2, 49-point over under. Packers side easy. Start Rodgers, start Adams, AJ Dillon. Boom. But problem with Dillon compared to Jones, we got to talk about that. They're just different backs. Dillon more of a bruiser down the back who can catch passes, 16 receptions on 18 targets this year. But hard than 4 receptions is really where they're going to run into, I think, a little bit of disappointment. I think between 2 and 4 is where we like to see. Minnesota allowing 4.5 yards per attempt to like that for Dillon. He's a firm start for me. He's going to be on top 12. There's some correlation, I think, between his usage and the Packers defense, as they've kept Arizona, Kansas City, and Seattle in check over the last 3 games. This is the 3rd best defense in football in points allowed and fewest passing yards allowed. I think I'm going to be under average on the Minnesota offense across the board. Washington, the only team currently to have over 400 total yards against Green Bay, Washington, right? And Cincinnati, the only other to hit 375, and it took like 17 missed field goals and overtime to hit that mark. The Green Bay defense, I think, has been the key to their victories. I'm a little bit uneasy to just lock in guys like Cook and Jefferson as top 5 options. They are great players. I just think they're in a very tough spot here because normally they're just top 8 locked in. They're still going to be top 12, but it's not going to be their ceiling games like you've seen in the past. When it comes to guys like Thielen, on the other hand, who I've been down on basically the entire year, I'm going to be well below average. I have him currently wide receiver 27. I cannot have him any lower because now we're running to guys like T. Higgins, the Buffalo guys. This is the absolute lowest I can have him ranked. Cousins outside my top 12. I think I need to move him down a little bit further as well. And I like to not start Tyler Conklin. And with that, we got under 30 minutes. Look at that. We like to keep these short. Don't want to have any more of those 50-minute podcasts. I'll lose my mind. But with that, if it was the first time or the last time you spent your time with me, I do appreciate it. Make sure to follow me at Methodical1 over on the Twitter so you can get to all my little tweets and my pinned ranks, which will help you out starting and sitting your players for week 11. Make sure to check out the other shows we have on the Gridiron Ratings YouTube channel. I'm at Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7:30. Getting the Defensive for all your IDP needs are on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the slate is on the weekend for your DFS needs. A little bit of tongue twister there before with my brain. But with that, we're going to get on out of here. Good luck in your Thursday. If you have any Thursday night football players going, hopefully not many Atlanta Falcons. And with that, we'll see you back here on Friday. Later.